Welcome everybody to this discussion, supplement the lecture. In this discussion we want to talk about specifically the history of the field, the study of Jewish folklore. We're fortunate that the YIVO Institute was able to provide original materials from the papers of the YIVO Institute when it was still in Vilna, when they collected materials for folklore from the YIVO Ethnographic Commission, which is an amazing collection. I mentioned in the lecture about the network of Zamlers, collectors all over Eastern Europe, mainly in Poland, and hundreds of those letters survive and are fascinating in their own right. And I sort of wanted to look at the collection of Yiddish folklore by looking at the questionnaires that were sent out to the Zamlers. From the very beginning of the study of Jewish folklore, there was this system of sending out a questionnaire. Max Grunwald sent one out when he started the Jewish Folklore Gesellschaft in Hamburg. Ginsberg and Marek sent out a questionnaire to collect songs. And probably the most famous questionnaire, partially because it was recently translated into English by Professor Nathaniel Deutsch, called The Jewish Dark Continent, translated Ansky's extensive hundreds of questions. I forget the exact number, but 1,000, more than 1,000 questions about daily Jewish life. And you have to remember this was, the historians weren't interested in daily Jewish life. And so the ethnographic impulse to find out what each, detailed descriptions of daily life was something new, and the historians became more ethnographic in their own right. I think that's an aspect of East European Jewish historiography, is that they were much more interested in ethnography than I think other historians at that time. Now Ansky, you know him from the play The Dybbuk, but he went on this historic expedition, ethnographic expedition. But what remains from that expedition in terms of printed material is the questionnaire. In terms of Jewish folklore, Ansky wanted to show how the Jewish people were unique. And I think many of the YIVO folklorists, headed by someone actually in New York, Yehuda Leib Kahn, he sort of wanted to show how the Jews are like everyone else. And you can look at every folkloric text like that too. How is it different? How is it Jewish? So there's always those two questions. It's interesting to compare when Ansky and his expedition came into a shtetl, they immediately they went to the synagogue and looked for the oldest people to interview, wanting to find out about the oldest ways, the oldest traditions of Jewish life. In the 20s, when people like Shmuel Lehman and Pinchas Grobart used to go to shtetls, they actually went to the young women and sought folk songs among them. They weren't interested as much as Ansky was in the older people. This is a page from Ansky's questionnaire. You'll see how detailed it is. Let's say the introduction to the cheder. In other words, when the child first came. At what age is a child in your community brought to the cheder? Do people in your community celebrate the bringing of a child to the cheder? Do people make a festive meal for the bringing to the cheder? Did you hear of that custom, like the first day of the cheder? When you read memoirs in Yiddish, it's actually one of those things that the men remember, because you do make a big deal about it. It's the first time the boy, not girl really, starts studying. What can I do? I didn't make the rules. But it's the first day that the boys start studying the Torah. So they make a big deal about it. Even today, I believe in the Hasidic world, they make it a sweet experience. Literally, they throw cookies over the child's head, and so he thinks, oh, I'm studying Torah, raisins or cookies or honey is coming. There's an association with sweetness. So that tradition actually in Hasidic world still continues. I read in someone's memoirs where they threw hops, like what you make beer with. On the way to the cheder, they were throwing hops, sort of a symbolic, just making it a special moment as he went to cheder for the first time. Who carries the child to synagogue or cheder? Does the child recite a commentary on the Torah? And actually, it's hundreds of years old, this custom. So Ansky was asking every little bit. You heard of this custom?
It sounds like he heard of it also, that he's saying that the answer is implied in the question.
Right. Well, that's what's so great about having a questionnaire that's so detailed, is actually we learn from the questions. We don't even need the answers, but we learn from the questions that this was happening. Because yes, a lot of times it's it's just a yes-no answer sometimes. Does this happen?
That's something I was wondering, just hearing about this. I mean, because I'm not a part of this world, I wouldn't know to ask who carries the child. I would think, oh, maybe the child walks himself. Or I would think, why would they have a feast at the cheder, to celebrate at the cheder? So, what, is it just, did he expect to hear yes most of the time?
Well, first let me say that there was a team that put this together.
Okay.
I mean, Ansky knew his stuff, but there was also a team of experts who helped him. Sternberg was actually the one who organized the whole committee, and in terms of the questionnaire. So it was a group effort to put this, hundreds of questions together, because it is a very regional thing, and that's part of what they wanted to find out. YIVO was very interested in this. And you see when you look at the collections that the YIVO, which is now, we're talking 15, 20 years later, like Ansky is 1912, YIVO starts in 1925, 1926 with the Ethnographic Commission. But people were very interested in regional differences. Sometimes it depended on where the collectors were, or how good the collectors were, and sort of skewed the results. So for instance, YIVO was asking for sammlers to send in folk songs. They got hundreds of songs, but just the texts, not the melodies. Why? Because knowing musical notation was already a skill that much fewer people have. But there was one couple in Podboros, right, in Lithuania, that sent in the music. So as a result, in the only collection of the YIVO materials, the ethnographic materials that came out in 1938, called Yiddish folklore, half the songs are from Podboros, this small town, because they were the ones who could write down the melodies.
What kind of scholarship was done before these expeditions that gave them the context to know what questions to ask in the first place?
Well, that's what's so interesting. Much of it is based on their own childhood. Because we're talking about a generation that grew up traditionally and then became revolutionaries, became secular Jews, became anti-religious, but they all grew up religious. So they knew, they knew the holy texts, they could study, they knew of what they were rebelling against, usually.